This week on To the Contrary, the big spending bill before Congress and its impact on women, children, and families. Then, most women are dissatisfied with how they're treated by society. And guess what? Men don't see a problem. Hello, I'm Bonnie Bay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, crafting a compromise. We know as soon as we say the word reconciliation or mention budget negotiations, eyes glaze over. But this is important and will have a real effect on the lives of Americans, especially women, children, families, and women of color. President Biden is hard selling his program to the American people as he continues to negotiate with all wings of his party. But there's an uncertainty about what will be left of Biden's Build Back Better bill when it's trimmed from $3.5 trillion over 10 years to more like $2 trillion. Free community college, elder care, and a renewable energy program seem like they won't be approved. The strengthened child tax credit could be extended for 1 year instead of 5. Other programs that could be scaled back include expanded paid leave, child care, and universal pre-kindergarten. Joining me today are former U.S. Representatives Donna Edwards and Nan Hayworth, Democratic strategist Hilary Rosen, and Washington Examiner commentary writer Tiana Lowe. When this bill ends up being crafted, will it resemble anything like the huge investment in people, women of color, children, etc., that the president really wanted to make?
Well, I still think that even a bill at $2 trillion is going to have the components in it that really invest in the social construct of people's lives. There's still a commitment around childcare. $500 billion is still going to be put into climate change, which includes resiliency for communities and disadvantaged communities. So I think this is going to be a substantial, bold investment like we haven't seen in generations in the American people. And it's going to make a difference in people's lives. And I know that, there's a tendency to talk about what's left out. And, most people don't know the difference between $2 trillion and $200,000. And so this investment is about investment in people in their communities.
Nan Hayworth, your thoughts, and welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Bonnie. And I always appreciate Donna's thoughtful approach and servant heart, truly. The idea of investing in Americans and of lifting everyone up is, of course, ennobling. That's what we should be doing. My contention has always been that it's a matter of considering the best means, the most effective means of achieving those salutary and noble goals. And I contend strongly that government is not, it should not be, and is not a good investor. That's really not the government's role. The government's role is to provide us primarily with protection of fundamental rights, public safety, and public safety means at the local level, the state level, and of course, at the national level in terms of confronting a potentially hostile world. That's where government's efforts should be focused. Nothing in the proposed bill is free, by the way. Everything is paid for by us, the citizens. And in fact, when government administers these kinds of programs, they tend to cost more, be less efficient, less effective, and less responsive. So I'm rooting for great things to happen, but I'm rooting for this bill not to go through.
Well, Hilary, Nancy Pelosi said at her Thursday briefing that that it's all paid for. What does she mean versus being free?
Well, what she means is that the Democrats are working hard to make sure that the wealthiest Americans and the largest corporations who got large tax cuts during the Trump era get balanced out a little bit and end up paying a little bit more, so that those people who have really been hurting over the last couple of years in this economy get a chance to have a leg up. And so that means things like child care support. That means things like a paid family leave, community college, historically Black universities and colleges. So there are a number of investments that the government is making. And I'm always amused when smart members of Congress, like Congresswoman Hayworth, says, like, we shouldn't be investing. That is exactly what we do in 1,000 areas that don't actually help individual Americans in a way. That we are investing in companies all the time in the defense space, for instance. What Republicans want to do with social programs, though, frequently is give tax credits and tax cuts. But if you don't have the income originally to get benefit from a tax cut or a tax credit, then you're not really being helped. And so these are not dollars that are going out to, large businesses. These are really subsidies that are allowing people to buy the goods and services that businesses in the private sector are providing.
Okay, Tiana, your thoughts.
Predictably, I think it's a disaster. I'm all in favor of investing, but you have to have a positive return on that investment. A very popular left-wing investment that we have is Title X, which provides contraception and reproductive services towards low-income women. That probably has, for every dollar spent, you get back 7 cents on a return. That is good for the economy. Build Back Better, we're talking about, we already have a $22 trillion national debt. We already have the highest debt to GDP ratio since World War II. Right now, as is, in a decade, we would have 106% debt to GDP ratio.
Explain to me why Republicans were not upset when President Trump increased the debt by billions and billions of dollars.
Okay, well, some Republicans, like this one right here, were very upset, and that was one of the sticking points. If you remember when they were talking about the skinny repeal of Obamacare, they could not hack it to reconciliation in a way that was either politically expedient to get those holdover votes, to get the McCain vote, but also in a way that wouldn't create another donut in our debt. And so with the tax cuts, the number one argument, and people I admitted that it was not true, is the idea that they'll pay for themselves by creating more growth. In some respect, some parts of it paid for itself, reducing the corporate tax rate. So we're now at the OECD average instead of 10 points above the OECD average. That did bring back American jobs.
Okay.
That was valuable.
Bonnie, can I jump in here?
Things that normal Americans can understand. Donna, what about the liberal wing of the Democratic Party? They don't seem to be happy with anything that Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden, they want so much more, and many would say so unrealistically. But last week on this show, we had one of our panelists said that, I asked about why there was such a disengagement this election as compared with 2 years ago. And she said, well, we gave our votes already and we've gotten nothing for it. Is that what you're hearing from left-wing Democrats?
No, it's not, in fact. I mean, I think if you listen to Pramila Jayapal from Washington, who's the chair of the Progressive Caucus, she has been knee-deep in negotiations with the administration and also with the moderates from the Senate. And I think that progressives are actually going to be very happy with this package. Is it everything that everyone wanted? Of course not. Did the president start at $3.5 trillion because he always knew he wanted to go to $2 trillion? No, I think that would be too cynical a read. I think the president outlined a plan that he believed in and that he thought could move through the Congress. It turns out that through negotiation, that's not true. But when you come to a $2 trillion plan. And I hate talking about the numbers because I want to talk about what's in it for the American people. The child tax credit is going to stay. It will be renewable after 1 year, but it makes a difference between keeping millions of children in poverty or out of poverty. Things like investments, as I said, in resiliency in communities to combat climate change. We see the devastation that happens in communities with floods and fires and all of these extreme weather events, and communities need to build that resiliency because the greatest impact of climate change is actually on communities of color and on poor communities.
All right, let me jump over to Hilary. The Democrats are obviously at this point, it's almost like Joe Manchin debating with every other Democrat in the House and Senate to get what he wants. He's from West Virginia, a coal state. He's very pro-coal and very pro-fossil fuels. And yet his state is number one in the country for suffering from repeat and large floods that sometimes wipe out small mountain towns. Where's he going with this?
Well, there's huge frustration, I think, with energy advocates with Joe Manchin because of the consistent desire to keep coal as such a significant part of our energy resources. And, but that's not going to change in the next few months. I mean, they're slowly getting at this. As Donna said, there are other climate provisions in this bill to move people on renewables, to move people to solar, to other things. And that is it's a slow change. This is, a very large ship turning around in a very small creek when we try and shift our energy sources in this country, because frankly, Americans don't really want to be inconvenienced very much. And so people play on that politically by trying to keep the status quo. And the coal industry through Senator Manchin has been really effective at that.
Tiana, are you rooting on Senator Manchin and his opposition to clean energy?
I very much believe that climate change is an imminent threat, which is why I'm disappointed that for the green spending, it's very limited for nuclear power. Biden would have a very bipartisan bill that he probably wouldn't even need to pass the reconciliation, just focusing on funding nuclear power. We're seeing in California and New York, these deep blue states have shut down their nuclear power plants and now have increased carbon emissions as a result.
I think you've seen, though, with our new Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, very pro-nuclear, really invested in looking at nuclear as an alternative source.
Yeah,
and frack and natural gas, which is mined by fracking.
Yeah,
yes,
and the state of New York, as we know, has at the state level banned recovery of that resource, which is the lowest carbon fossil fuel, although agreeing entirely with Hilary's point that, Tiana's point, forgive me, that our carbon footprint rose when we closed Indian Point nuclear power plant, which was, I felt, that was a big backward step and not the right way to go. And I'm glad that Secretary Granholm is endorsing nuclear power. That is the way forward for the world, the next generation of nuclear in so many ways. But I witnessed when I was in the House, and I'm sure Donna has her own stories of this, but I certainly witnessed how those who seek federal support for projects can be seeking that support because actually those projects don't make sense in the real world of markets. And the problem with federal so-called investment, which again, I fundamentally oppose, federal investment in businesses that otherwise should be private, is that when it's other people's money, when it's taxpayers' money, there's far less impetus to steward that money carefully. Private investment with money for which we're responsible for the profit or loss, tends to be far more sensibly apportioned. And a lot of it, when it's from the government level, it's not as wisely managed as it is in markets and American.
The fact is that when the government makes an investment in electrification, that spurs a whole level of investment from the private sector. When the government makes an investment in rural broadband, that spurs a whole level of investment from the private sector. And so it isn't as though the government does everything, but it does, sort of jumpstart some of these industries. And I think that that's important for job creation in the long run for the American people.
In a bygone era, it was much more important than it is now.
We are out of time. From divergent views on Capitol Hill to differences between how men and women see gender equality. Most women are not happy with how women are being treated in America, but most men don't think it's a problem. That, according to a new Gallup poll. In fact, women's satisfaction is now at a record low. 2/3 of men think that women and men have equal job opportunities, yet only 1/3 of women agree. One thing men and women agree on is that affirmative action programs for women should be used more widely. Just a few years ago, most women reported being satisfied with how society treated them. But now, less than half would say the same thing. That drop coincides with the emergence of the Me Too movement. So do you think the Me Too movement showed women that, all this stuff was going on that they didn't think was going on anymore and made them dissatisfied with their jobs?
Well, I don't think it started with the Me Too movement. But look, the truth is success of women in the workplace today, and in my view, is like literally a miracle. It's a testament to our fortitude, our resilience, because every single day women are working in a system that was literally created originally to keep us out and to keep us in the home. So, the fact that childcare wasn't built into the workplace, that there's unequal pay, that there were a lack of senior executives or board power, being subjected to the sexual harassment. I mean, all of those things women have overcome to get as far as we have today. And so I think it's a really important point to think about how you take that resilience and move forward, because we know that just demonstrating bias, like this study is showing, hasn't been enough to create real change. It takes more than that.
We stand on the shoulders of giants. My mother was a secretary in the time and the era when secretaries were often more talented than their bosses. And she was a 4-year World War II veteran. And when her bosses after the war were not sufficiently respectful, she told them to take a hike and she got a better job. For myself, thanks to the many advances that advocates for women, among women and among men who became advocates and allies, thanks to that, I have never felt disadvantaged in my professional career in any capacity as a woman. I have collaborated with men, I've competed against men, and I've been very blessed to feel no impediments. In fact, to feel even advantaged to be a woman in certain respects. What does concern me quite a bit is that we may actually be losing sight of the fact that there are a lot of, and I'm the mother of two boys, I raised 2 boys that really, boys are also facing a lot of challenges in the current environment. And there was just a recent, very interesting piece of data that women are graduating with advanced degrees at basically about 1.5 times the rate that men are. So I think there's much rich opportunity for us to consider how we balance the role of regulation and markets, again, when it comes to issues of gender.
Okay, but this increase in dissatisfaction, now the Gallup poll, the Gallup people lay it on at least partially to the Me Too movement. I presume that means as women saw what was still being done to women in Hollywood, they started to look around and think, well, maybe, I'm being sexually harassed. I was sexually assaulted as a network correspondent way earlier, different network, way earlier in my career. And it was so long ago that I didn't even think of it as, I just thought my boss was a real pain and needed to, keep it to himself. But so there's that. But this also coincided with the time of the one Trump term as president. Tiana, do you think women were set back by Trump and some of his laws and his court appointments?
Economically, not at all. I think everyone can account for, until, COVID, unprecedented global pandemic, women and minorities were the ones to have the greatest wage gains and have the greatest job gains. It was more women and minorities than just regular white men. Trump's policies, I think, were extraordinary for women. But it is very demoralizing. And I say this as someone who's, a mixed bag on Trump, but I admit he did a lot of good things. It's very demoralizing that half of the presidents in my lifetime have been credibly accused of sexual assault, if not criminal rape. I think the reason why it coincided with the Me Too movement, this decrease in satisfaction, is not about the Me Too movement rather than its failure. And the fact that it became eminently clear, especially in the last year, how politically motivated it was and how willing other activist movements were willing to discard it.
One of the things I believe that the Me Too movement did was it opened women up to disclosing what was happening to them in their workplaces, and for us to be able to see that in the full view of the public. And I think that, the combination of that, the Trump years and the pandemic has enabled women to see their workplaces in very different ways. I mean, add to the burden on childcare, on schooling your children at home during the pandemic. And these were burdens that fell largely on women. And so it's not a surprise.
Yes, because the teachers' unions decided to keep schools closed.
Tiana, let me finish. Because it's not a surprise to me that women are facing, this moment of looking at their jobs and their work lives and trying to evaluate that in the context of them being able to move ahead. And it's also not a surprise that men look at from their perspective that, they are either, more satisfied, or they think that, women are, sort of exaggerating their dissatisfaction because they're sitting in a different place from women. And I think add to that women of color and what we face in the workplace. And, that accounts for a lot of those dissatisfaction numbers.
This poll also showed that Hispanic and African American women and men were farther apart on this issue than white people. Very quickly, each of you, 2 sentences. What's going on there? Starting with you, Hilary.
Well, I was going to say, this worker dissatisfaction, 2/3 of minimum wage workers are women. And of that, half of their salaries are going to childcare. And so what you have is just this disproportionate amount of women and people of color at the minimum wage level. We're not getting the progress that we need.
Tiana, your thoughts on why people of color, men and women of color, are farther apart?
It's easy. Jacob Blake raped his wife, got a restraining order filed against him because of it, violated the restraining order while armed with a knife, and then was shot. And the hero of the story was not his black wife. It was not the black woman who had to incur his violence, but Jacob Blake. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris called him a hero and met with him. They said that this never should have happened because the police were trying to save a black woman, and they decided to make Jacob Blake the hero. Of course, I'd be livid. In DC where I live, almost all of the victims of violent crime are people of color. And in all the domestic violence situations, it is black and brown women. And the fact is, because we decided BLM, defund the police, was a great idea, we have to pretend that that's not happening.
Nan, your thoughts on why people of color are farther apart on the dissatisfaction level?
I obviously have not lived my life as a person of color, but I can offer these thoughts. I agree with Tiana that public safety is especially important in communities where there is strife and where opportunities have not been as great for advancement as they should be. I think the key to so much of this is education. It is the way in which we can all advance together. I think we do have a terrible problem in this country with education failing. I think a lot of that lies at the foot of, I'm sorry to say, but public sector unions, particularly teachers unions. Tiana referred to that. And as long as we are not advancing girls and boys educationally where communities are most in need, we are going to continue to suffer from a disproportionate lack of opportunity and from a lack of, I think, social cohesion and respect for each other.
We are completely out of time. I'm sorry. That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Let's continue the conversation on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And please visit our website, our PBS website, at www.tothecontrary.org. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, please join us next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more. PBS.